Dust rode the wind like old sins. The desert town of Whitlock shimmered beneath the late afternoon sun. Buildings warped by heat and time. Wagons creaked. A church bell tolled once for a funeral, once for the hour, and once for no one at all. Agnes stepped off the porch in Miss Delia's saloon. Skirt hitched above her boots, a letter clutched in one hand like it might bite her. It wasn't addressed to her, but she'd read it anyway. To Miss Mirabelle Thatcher. It said in careful ink, "I offer my estate, my name, and my protection. I seek a wife to ease the silence of the land. In return, I promise peace." Elias Burrow. That was the name scrawled like a brand at the bottom. Agnes spat into the dirt. Her mouth still tasted of cheap whiskey and men's want. For 3 years she'd scrubbed floors and dodged hands at Delia's. No one married girls like her. Not after they knew how you bled, how you bent. But her sister, Mirabelle, had never seen the inside of a saloon. Kept pure, protected, even with the crooked leg and soft heart. She was always the one someone might write to. But Mirabelle had torn the letter in half the moment it arrived. Agnes had stitched it back together, slow and quiet. Now it rode in her pocket, and she rode on the stage before the week was out. Asterisk. The Burrow estate rose from the land like something half swallowed by it. Fence posts leaned like old drunks. A single chimney leaked pale smoke into the dusk. The driver didn't linger, barely let her off before snapping the reins and vanishing in a cloud of red dust. Agnes stood still. The man on the porch didn't wave, didn't smile. Elias Burrow was broader than she'd imagined, all gut and chest and shoulders like fallen trees. He wore a dark coat despite the heat, and didn't offer his hand. "You ain't her," he said. Agnes let the wind fill the pause. "I am, for now." They didn't speak much after that. Inside, the house was colder than it should have been, stone floors and shuttered windows. A large portrait hung above the fireplace, oil dark and brittle, of a woman with gray eyes and a child on her lap. The paint had cracked where the child's mouth should be. Agnes unpacked in silence. Her room had a single bed, a chip basin, and no mirror. That night, over beans and salt pork, Elias stared into his plate like a hell prophecy. "You come for money?" he asked. Agnes tilted her head. "Is that what you offered?" "I offered quiet. The land won't hold without a woman in the house. It remembers being cursed, and it punishes men who forget." She said nothing. He didn't look up again. When she crept out later to breathe under the stars, she found no stars. Just smoke from somewhere she couldn't see, and the smell of something burning that had once been alive. Asterisk. The next morning, she didn't speak. Neither did he. By the second, she asked where the help had gone. "Ran off," he said, "or got swallowed by the wind." Agnes swept the house, lit the stove, folded her own linens. No one told her what a mail-order bride was supposed to do, so she did everything. On the third night, she stood at the window and watched the fields sway in moonlight, like a woman trying to decide whether to dance or drown. Elias sat by the fire, polishing a revolver he hadn't used since the war. "You got ghosts," she said. He didn't look up. "We all do." He didn't touch her, didn't leer or threaten, or even ask. He just sat there, hollow and heavy, like a monument no one visited anymore. She watched him for a long time, and she saw it. Behind the quiet and bulk, a man who hadn't forgiven himself for something. That was worse than cruelty. It was a wound you kept feeding. She packed before sunrise. Didn't say goodbye. Asterisk. Back in town, the stage office was quiet, save for the thump of papers and the snore of the clerk. Agnes slapped her hand on the counter and gave her name. "Stagecoach East," she said. "Fastest one." The man blinked awake. "You the Burrow bride?" She hesitated, then lied. "No, that was my sister." The clerk scratched his beard, nodding. "Shame. We had her name in the ledger. Guess you'll come now." "Guess she will." Asterisk. Mirabelle didn't cry when she read the second letter. She didn't speak either. Just sat there on the porch steps with her crooked leg tucked beneath her skirt and the sun catching the fray in her braid. "You don't have to go," Agnes said, kneeling beside her. "He's just a man, and not a cruel one, just strange, broken. Mirabelle finally looked at her. You left him? Agnes nodded. I didn't want to be someone's curer. Mirabelle's voice was barely wind. Maybe I do. The next day, she stepped into the same coach Agnes had left behind. Waved once. Didn't look back. Asterisk. The land stretched wide and patient. Nothing moved except the wind. And Elias stood by the fence when Mirabelle arrived, same as before. But this time he offered his hand. When she took it, her fingers trembled. He noticed. Don't be afraid, he said. Mirabelle looked up at him. Why not? He said nothing. Just helped her into the wagon like she was made of glass, not skin. As they rode up the hill, the ranch came into view. Same broken weather vane, same hollow chimney. But the sky had changed. Clouds were gathering. And behind them, somewhere far, thunder rolled like something waking up. Something that didn't forget. Asterisk. And the land watched. Waiting. The house never made a sound. But Mirabelle still listened for one. Not for footsteps or voices. Those were too human. But for the breathing of old wood, the whisper walls long shut, the kind of hush that didn't feel empty but watching. She'd been at the Burrow estate for 3 days, and each morning came a little colder, as if the house drew warm from her slowly, like a man bleeding under blankets. Elias was polite, in the way a man might be with a stranger whose grief he couldn't name. He rose before dawn, fed the chickens, rode out to the far fields, and came back at dusk. He did not expect meals from her. He did not knock before entering rooms. But he never crossed a line, never reached for her in the night, never stared too long. And that quiet scared her more than cruelty ever could. The house had rooms she wasn't shown, doors that stuck when she tried to turn the knobs. The main hall held the portrait of the woman again, the wife who never smiled. Mirabelle began to trace its cracks like a map. Her eyes, gray and wide. The child on her lap. Neither looked at the painter. Both stared slightly away, like they'd seen something coming. She asked Elias one evening, "Did you love her?" He took longer than necessary to chew his bite of stew. "I didn't know her long enough to learn." "Was she beautiful?" He sipped water. "The land thought so. She made it bloom." Mirabelle folded her hands. And when she left, his eyes drifted to the hearth. "It died." He didn't say more. He never did. The next morning, Mirabelle cleaned. She wasn't asked to. He'd told her plainly she wasn't a servant. But she needed the motion. Her leg ached less when she kept moving. In the east wing, a locked door yielded when she pressed her shoulder to it, just enough to let her slip inside. Dust lay heavy on everything. A child's drawings curled on the floor. Stick figures, suns with too many rays. A crooked horse. A doll's arm peeked out from under the bed like something buried. On the far wall, above a small dresser, hung a shawl, the kind worn by women in mourning or in love. Mirabelle stepped backward without realizing, her heels striking the floorboard hard. Behind her, the door creaked open wider. Elias stood in the doorway. His voice was quiet. "You weren't meant to see this." She turned slowly. "I didn't mean to." She kept this room perfect, even after the boy. Said if it stayed whole, she would too. His eyes had none of their usual stillness now. They looked storm-lit. Then one day she screamed. Just screamed. For hours. When it stopped, the room had changed. Mirabelle glanced at the drawings. How? She'd torn every stitch from the mattress. Broke the mirror with her bare hands. Said the land had swallowed her son. He exhaled like something heavy passed through him. That was the day she walked into the canyon and never came back. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "Lock the door when you leave." That night she dreamed of wind, of lullabies sung through cracked glass, of a voice, not hers, not her sister's, saying he's still here under the roots. She woke before dawn, sweat damp on her neck. In the silence, something scratched softly at the window. She limped to it, opened the shutter. Nothing, only the black horizon and the sound of something breathing not far off. She told herself it was the wind. Again, at breakfast, Elias set a small wooden box on the table. "For you." Inside lay a comb, bone-handled, carved with flowers. Real ivory, not imitation. It belonged to my wife, he said, but she never wore it. Mirabelle touched it gently. Then why give it to me? His hands tightened on the edge of the table. Because she never stayed. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't have to. The air between them had grown thinner. That afternoon, she rode into town alone. Her leg protested the journey, and the mare was old and slow. But she needed voices, noise people. The ranch had begun to feel like a tomb with no gravestones. At the general store, a man tipped his hat politely, but stared too long at her limp. Two women whispered behind their hands. And at the saloon, when she asked for water, the barkeep blinked and said, "You come back again?" She frowned. "I've never been here." "Sure you have. A month ago. Black-haired gal. You look like her, but younger." A barmaid leaned in. She left real fast. That ranch eats women. Mirabelle dropped the cup. It hit the floor and shattered. She rode back hard, legs screaming the whole way. Elias wasn't in the house when she returned. She searched the barn, the fields. Nothing. The air had changed again. Thicker, hungrier. In her room, the comb sat on the bed. She hadn't left it there. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the fire and whispered to it. "If the land remembers, then so do I." Outside, the wind rose, but inside, the house held its breath. Snow came early, just a dusting at first, the kind that melts by noon. But by nightfall, it clung to the branches like old memories. The sky turned the color of wet stone, and the ranch creaked in the cold, louder now, like the wood was learning to speak again. Mirabelle watched from the parlor window as twilight bled into frost. Something had changed. The house had begun to feel less like a silence and more like a held breath. Elias hadn't spoken much in days, not even his usual one-sentence truths. He took longer in the fields. The shadows under his eyes deepened, and the locked door, the one with the child's drawings, now sat slightly ajar each morning, though she hadn't touched it since. Then came the boot prints. She found them just before dawn when she stepped outside with a pail. For distinct tracks leading from the edge of the woods to the barn, and none coming back. The prints were too small for Elias, and too deliberate for an animal. Not wide strides. Measured. Human. She didn't mention them. Not yet. Instead, she walked the perimeter. At the back fence, by a post sagging under barbed wire, something fluttered, a scrap of color. She limped closer, heart quickening. A ribbon, pale blue, frayed at the ends. Hers once, but given away. Agnes. Mirabelle turned slowly, scanning the horizon. There were no riders, no figures in the snow. Just the quiet hush of the land breathing cold through the hills. She didn't tell Elias. She wanted it to be her imagination. But by nightfall, the dogs barked for the first time in weeks, then fell silent just as fast. The knock came just past midnight. Mirabelle moved toward the door before Elias did. He held a lantern, but didn't lift it high. His shoulders were stiff, wide hands wrapped tight around the metal handle. He looked at her once, as if to say, "You don't want to know." But she opened the door anyway. Agnes stood barefoot in the snow, cloak soaked through, hat gone, hair tangled with bramble, a rifle slung over one shoulder. Blood dried at her temple. She didn't smile. "Took the long way home," she said, teeth chattering. "Shot a wolf. Or maybe it shot me." Elias said nothing. Agnes stepped in without permission. Inside, the fire cast long shadows. She dropped into a chair like she'd been expected. "I made it halfway to California," she said, warming her hands. Then I remembered why I left in the first place. Mirabelle stood motionless. "You told me I'd be safe here." Agnes looked up, slow. "You were safer than I ever was." "He didn't want me. I wasn't what he wrote for." Elias turned to fire. "I wrote for silence. I got sisters." His voice was dry as salt. He didn't turn around. Agnes studied him. Still hearing her? He didn't answer. That night, the wind howled hard enough to shake the shutters. Agnes slept on the settee, rifle in her arms. Mirabelle lay awake, heart tapping like a Morse code she couldn't read. She rose before dawn. Found Elias already saddling the horses. "Where are you going?" she asked. His eyes were shadowed. "To where the ghosts end." He rode out before she could stop him. Agnes was already at the window when Mirabelle returned inside. "He's going to the canyon," she said. "I followed the old trail yesterday. Found a fire pit, bones, maybe human, and a necklace made of teeth." Mirabelle's voice was hoarse. "You think she's still alive?" Agnes met her gaze. "I think he does." By mid-morning, they followed. The canyon lay 2 hours southwest, where the hills broke into sheer rock and the sky dropped low. The wind changed as they rode. Colder, sharper, almost metallic. Trees grew sparse. The snow here hadn't melted. Ravens circled. They found Elias's horse tied to a dying pine. The trail led downward into shadow. They dismounted. At the bottom of the ravine, tucked into stone like a secret, stood a crude shelter of bark and animal hide. Smoke curled faintly from within. Elias stood just outside it, rifle lowered, face carved from stone. A woman stepped from the shelter. She was not young. Her face bore lines like old bark. Her hair was wild. She wore a coat stitched from rabbit pelts and carried no weapon. Her eyes were distant, as if she'd been looking inward too long. She looked past Elias, past Mirabelle, straight at Agnes. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Agnes froze. "You know me? I know the land. It keeps what it's owed." Elias stepped between them. "I came to bring you home." The woman flinched. "This is home. You don't belong in a hole." She bared her teeth, not a smile, more memory of one. "I belong where the screaming stops." Elias didn't lift his rifle. His voice cracked instead. "He was ours, and I buried him too fast." The wind rose, as if in agreement. Then thunder cracked, sharp, close, and smoke erupted from behind the ridge. A fire. Lightning had struck the brush above. Elias turned toward it, but the woman collapsed. Mirabelle rushed forward. The woman's chest rose faintly. She was still breathing, just weakened, underfed. Agnes grabbed a blanket from the shelter. "We carry her." The smoke thickened. Elias didn't argue. He lifted his wife into his arms and followed the sisters out. Behind them, the canyon lit orange. The land had spoken, and it was not done burning. Smoke threaded through the pines as they climbed, carrying the stench of scorched brush and something older, bone perhaps, or time itself. The fire wasn't chasing them yet, but it would. The wind had shifted. Mirabelle felt in her throat before she saw the flames lick the ridge behind them, hungry and mean. Elias didn't speak. He carried the woman, his wife, not a ghost after all, across his back like a sack of wheat, but gentler. One arm cradled beneath her legs, the other pressing her to his chest. Her head lolled against his collar. She hadn't woken since the canyon. Agnes led the way, rifle slung tight, boots crunching snow over rock. Her braid had come loose, and blood dried in the corner of her mouth from a cracked lip. She never looked back, but she wasn't walking ahead like someone trying to escape anymore. She walked like someone daring the land to stop her. They reached a bluff by dusk. The old logging cabin Elias had once used for fence work stood crooked in the wind, walls blackened from storms long past. The roof sagged, but it would hold for a night. Inside, Mirabelle laid blankets by the hearth. Elias gently settled his wife down. Her chest rose, shallow, steady, alive. No one asked her name. "She doesn't remember it," Elias said softly, rubbing ash from his wrist. "After the boy died, she started naming birds instead of people. Said names like anchors, that you drown slower without one." Mirabelle knelt beside the woman. Her skin was cold and thin as parchment. She looked at her hand, scarred fingers, broken nails, wrist bones like twigs, and said, barely audible, "We'll warm you. We'll keep you." The fire snapped to life, as if it believed her. Outside, the flames along the ridge crackled like distant gunfire. Agnes paced. "She shouldn't have been left like that," she said. "Not in that canyon. Not like an animal." Elias looked up slowly. "I searched for days, found her tracks. Then nothing. Thought she threw herself off the edge. "You thought that," Agnes said, "because it was easier than carrying the truth." He didn't deny it, just leaned forward and rested his face in his hands. His shoulders shook once, like a tremor in a dying animal, then went still. Mirabelle reached across the fire, laid her palm on his. "You tried to bury it all," she whispered. "Her, the grief, the child. You built silence around it like a house. But silence isn't mercy." He didn't cry, but something cracked in him, quieter than wood, louder than thunder. The wind wailed through the chimney. Agnes sat finally, unslinging her rifle and setting it across her knees. "We'll wait till morning," she said. "If the wind stays north, the fire might turn." "But if it doesn't," Mirabelle said, "we'll carry her again." Elias nodded once. In the dark hours, while the fire burned low, the woman stirred. She opened her eyes. Mirabelle was already awake, sitting beside her, humming a lullaby she half remembered. The woman didn't speak, but her fingers curled gently toward the sound. Asterisk. By morning, the smoke had thinned. The fire had veered west. They descended slowly, the woman wrapped in shawl, supported on either side. The air smelled cleaner. A few birds returned, cautious and bright-eyed. When they reached the Burrow Ranch again, the land looked different. Not healed, but breathing again. Elias built a small cabin down near the creek, a place the main house could not see, but close enough to reach with soup and wood and warmth. He filled it with blankets, fixed the hinges on the door, never locked it. Agnes stayed 2 weeks, then rode into town and put her name on the deed for a shop space. "Sewing and mending," she said. "Need something to keep my hands from burning," she told Mirabelle. "Besides, someone needs to make sure folks don't call this place Curse anymore." Mirabelle watched her ride away with shoulders square and steady. The kind of departure that didn't mean leaving, just becoming. Later that evening, she found Elias in the barn, sanding down a rocking chair. His hands were stained with pine dust. His eyes no longer fled from hers. She took the comb from her coat pocket, the one he'd given her weeks ago, and handed it back. He looked at it, then at her. "She never wore it," he said again. Mirabelle stepped closer. "I will." He kissed her then, not with hunger, not with guilt, but with a kind of quiet choosing. The land was still. The birds kept singing.